The smell of fresh coffee and maple syrup filled the air of Wilson's diner as the morning sun peeked through the blinds. James Wilson wiped down the counter with a clean rag, his movements practiced and smooth after 20 years of the same routine. The small bell above the door jingled as another regular customer walked in. "Morning, Mr. Wilson," called out an elderly man, settling into his usual booth by the window. "Morning, Earl. The usual?" James asked with a genuine smile that reached his eyes, crow's feet crinkling at the corners. "You know it." James nodded to his cook through the service window before pouring a cup of coffee for Earl. At 58, James moved a bit slower than he used to, but his hands remained steady. The diner wasn't anything fancy, just 12 tables, a counter with 8 stools, and walls covered with photos of the neighborhood from decades past. Some showed the street outside when it was still cobblestone. Others captured faces of people long gone but not forgotten. The neighborhood had changed around him. When James first opened the diner, this had been a thriving black community with family-owned businesses lining both sides of the street. Now, sleek coffee shops and boutique stores had replaced most of the old establishments. Wilson's Diner stood as one of the last originals, a testament to James's stubborn determination. "Order up," called his cook, sliding a plate of eggs, grits, and sausage onto the pass-through window. James grabbed the plate and placed it in front of Earl. "There you go. Hot off the grill." The morning rush ebbed and flowed. Office workers hurried in for coffee to go. Construction workers from the new development down the street ordered hearty breakfasts, and a few elderly neighbors lingered over their meals, treating the diner like a second living room. "You see they're tearing down the old barber shop?" asked a woman named Gladys who had been coming to the diner every Tuesday for as long as James could remember. "I heard," James said, refilling her cup. Mr. Taylor's son didn't want to take over the business, and no one else made an offer before the developers swooped in. "Soon there won't be anything left of the old neighborhood." Gladys sighed. James just nodded. He'd had this conversation many times before. He understood progress was inevitable, but it didn't make watching the erosion of his community any easier. Around 11, the breakfast crowd thinned out. James took the moment of quiet to check his books in the small office behind the kitchen. The numbers weren't great. Ever since the pandemic hit a few years back, the diner had struggled to regain its footing. Food costs kept rising, and his old equipment needed constant repairs. Last month, he'd had to replace the refrigerator, which ate through what little savings he had managed to put aside. His cook, Raymond, poked his head into the office. "We're running low on ground beef. Want me to call in an order or stretch what we've got?" James rubbed his forehead. "Call it in. We can't cut corners on food quality. That's not who we are." Raymond nodded and disappeared back into the kitchen. James stared at the figures in his ledger a moment longer before closing it with a heavy sigh. The truth was staring him in the face. At this rate, the diner might not survive another year. He returned to the front just as a young woman pushed through the door, a sleeping toddler on her hip. "Hey, Lisa," James greeted her quietly, mindful of the sleeping child. "Rough night?" "The roughest," she replied, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "Tommy's got an ear infection. We were at the emergency room until 4 this morning." James winced in sympathy. "Poor little guy. And poor Mama. What can I get you?" "Just some toast and coffee if you don't mind." "That's all I can afford until payday." Without a word, James put in an order for a full breakfast and poured her a large coffee with plenty of cream. Just how she liked it. "Mr. Wilson," I said, "just toast." "It's on the house," he said firmly. "You need your strength to take care of that little boy." Tears welled in Lisa's eyes. "I can't keep accepting handouts. It's not a handout. It's community," James replied, his voice gentle but firm. "My mama always said we rise by lifting others. One day when you're back on your feet, you'll do the same for someone else." This was how James had always run his business, even when the accountant who did his taxes told him he was crazy. "You're running a diner, not a charity," the man would say every year when he saw how much food James had given away. But James couldn't turn away hungry people, especially not children. The lunch crowd started trickling in around noon, the diner filled with the sounds of conversation and clinking silverware. James moved between tables, greeting everyone by name, asking about family members or remembering special occasions. He knew which customers were dealing with illness, which ones had children graduating whose mother was in the hospital. In an increasingly disconnected world, Wilson's Diner remained a place where people felt seen. Around 2 o'clock, when the lunch rush was winding down, a man in an expensive suit walked in. He wasn't a regular, and he looked slightly out of place among the working-class customers. James could tell from his watch alone that this man could probably buy the entire building without blinking. "Table for one?" James asked, grabbing a menu. "Yes, please," the man replied, his voice surprisingly humble for someone who carried himself with such confidence. James seated him at a small table near the back and handed him the menu. "Special today is meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans. Coffee's fresh and the pie just came out of the oven about an hour ago." "The special sounds perfect," the man said, hardly glancing at the menu. "And coffee black." As James turned to put in the order, the bell above the door jingled again. But this time no one walked in. James looked toward the entrance and caught a glimpse of a small face peering through the glass, before quickly disappearing. He frowned slightly and went to the window. Outside on the sidewalk stood a boy, maybe 11 or 12 years old, thin and small for his age. The child's clothes were dirty and too big for his frame, his sneakers held together with duct tape. He was staring at the people eating inside with an expression James recognized immediately: hunger mixed with pride. The boy noticed James watching him and quickly backed away from the window, ready to run. But there was something in his eyes, not just physical hunger, but a deeper kind of emptiness that tugged at James's heart. Without hesitation, James pushed open the door and stepped outside. "Hey there," he called gently. "You hungry?" The boy froze, clearly calculating whether to flee or stay. "I don't have any money," he finally said, his voice barely audible over the street noise. "Didn't ask if you had money," James replied. "Asked if you were hungry?" The boy looked at him suspiciously, as if waiting for the catch. James recognized that look too, the wariness of someone who'd learned the hard way that nothing in life comes free. "Come on in," James said, holding the door open. "Weather's getting chilly out here." The boy hesitated, glancing up and down the street as if checking for some kind of trap. "I'm James," he offered, trying to ease the boy's fears. "I own this place, and I've got a rule. Nobody goes hungry at Wilson's Diner, especially not kids." Something in James's tone must have convinced him, because the boy took a cautious step forward, then another, until he was standing in the doorway of the diner. James noticed how the child's eyes darted around, taking in every detail, noting all the exits, the behavior of someone used to needing escape routes. "Let's get you something to eat," James said, leading him to a small table in the corner, where he could have some privacy but still feel safe. "You sit tight. I'll be right back." As James headed to the kitchen to prepare a meal for the boy, he didn't notice the well-dressed man watching the entire interaction with intense interest. Nor could he have guessed how this simple act of kindness, one of hundreds he had performed over the years, would change everything in the days to come. The boy sat stiffly at the corner table, his thin shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself even smaller. His eyes darted around the diner, taking in every detail: the photographs on the walls, the worn countertop, the other customers eating their meals. His gaze lingered on their plates, but he quickly looked down whenever someone glanced his way. James returned from the kitchen carrying a large glass of milk and a small bowl of soup. "Let's start with this," he said, placing them gently in front of the boy. "The main course will be ready in a few minutes." The child stared at the food, not moving. "Go ahead," James encouraged. "It's potato soup. Made it fresh this morning." Still, the boy hesitated, his hands resting on his lap beneath the table. James pulled up a chair and sat down across from him. "What's your name, son?" The boy shifted uncomfortably. "Tyler," he finally said, so quietly James almost missed it. "Nice to meet you, Tyler. I'm James Wilson. This is my diner." He gestured around the space. "Been running it for 20 years now." Tyler nodded slightly but remained tense. "You know," James continued, keeping his voice casual, "my grandmother used to say soup tastes better when it's warm." He nudged the bowl a little closer. A faint rumble came from Tyler's stomach, loud enough that both of them heard it. The boy's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Tell you what," James said, standing up. "I need to check on a few things in the kitchen. You take your time. No rush." He walked away, giving Tyler space and privacy. From behind the counter, James watched as Tyler cautiously picked up the spoon, dipped it into the soup. A and took a small taste. The boy's eyes widened slightly and then he began to eat, slowly at first, then with increasing speed as his hunger took over. In the kitchen, James put together a proper meal. "Raymond, let's make something special for our young guest." Raymond glanced through the service window at Tyler. "Poor kid looks half-starved." "Yeah," James agreed, his expression somber. "Make the portions good-sized but not too big at first. Don't want to overwhelm his stomach if he hasn't eaten properly in a while." They prepared a plate with a grilled cheese sandwich cut into triangles, a small portion of fries and some sliced apples on the side. Simple food that would be gentle on an empty stomach, but filling and appealing to a child. When James returned to Tyler's table, the soup bowl was empty, and the milk glass half full. The boy sat straighter now, some of the tension gone from his shoulders. "Here we go," James said, setting down the plate. "Nothing fancy, just good food." Tyler's eyes widened at the sight of the meal. "All of this is for me?" "All yours," James confirmed. "And there's more if you're still hungry after." Tyler picked up half of the grilled cheese sandwich with both hands. He took a bite and closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the simple comfort of warm bread and melted cheese. James noticed the boy's fingernails were dirty but trimmed short, and there was a fading bruise on his wrist. The clothes he wore were too big and worn thin at the elbows, but they were as clean as they could be without proper washing. This wasn't a child who had been on the streets for long. There was still care in his appearance, still an attempt at dignity. "You from around here?" James asked, keeping his tone conversational. Tyler shook his head, his mouth full of sandwich. "Just passing through?" The boy swallowed his bite. "Sort of." He hesitated, then added, "We got evicted 3 weeks ago. My mom's trying to find a new place." James nodded, careful to keep any pity from showing on his face. "That's tough. Where's your mom now?" "Job hunting," Tyler said, picking up a French fry. "She said to meet her at the library at 5. They let us sit there all day if we're quiet." James thought about the public library 8 blocks away. It was one of the few places in the city where people could spend hours indoors without needing to buy anything. "And school?" James asked. Tyler stared down at his plate. "Mom's trying to figure that out. We need an address to register." The diner's front door opened and a group of teenagers came in, laughing loudly. Tyler tensed immediately, his body language shifting back to alert wariness. "It's okay," James assured him. "Just some kids from the high school. They come in most days after classes let out." Tyler nodded but kept his eyes on his plate, shoulders hunched again. James recognized the posture of a child who had learned to make himself invisible to avoid trouble. The well-dressed man in the back of the diner finished his meal and signaled for the check. James nodded at him and turned back to Tyler. "You keep eating. I'll be right back." James went to take care of the customer, ringing up his bill at the register. "How was everything?" "Excellent," the man replied, handing over a credit card. "Best meatloaf I've had in years." As James processed the payment, the man glanced toward Tyler's table. "That boy, is he a regular customer?" Something protective flared in James's chest. "He's a guest," he said simply, his tone making it clear he wouldn't discuss the child further. The man seemed to understand and nodded. "Your diner has a good feeling to it. It's rare these days." "We try," James said, returning the credit card and receipt. The man left a generous tip and stood to leave. As he walked past Tyler's table, he slowed slightly, not staring but taking in the scene. The thin boy eating carefully, making each bite last, the way his eyes still darted to the door occasionally. After the man left, James checked on his other customers, then returned to Tyler, who had finished most of his meal. "Still hungry?" James asked. Tyler hesitated, then nodded. "How about some dessert? We've got apple pie today." The boy's eyes lit up for the first time. "Really?" "Really," James smiled. "With ice cream if you want." "Yes, please," Tyler said, the formal politeness sounding rehearsed, as if his mother had drilled good manners into him. James brought out a slice of pie with a small scoop of vanilla ice cream melting on top. He set it down in front of Tyler, whose eyes grew wide at the treat. "Thank you," the boy said quietly, picking up his fork. "You're welcome." James sat down again. "Tyler, can I ask how old you are?" 11, he answered, taking a bite of pie. "Almost 12, James nodded. 11 years old and dealing with homelessness. No child should have to face that. And it's just you and your mom?" Tyler nodded, focused on his dessert. "What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" The boy was quiet for so long that James thought he might not answer. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom got sick. She couldn't work for a while. We fell behind on rent. He shrugged as if to say that's all it took, and James knew that was indeed all it took. So many people in their community lived paycheck to paycheck, just one illness or car breakdown away from disaster. She's better now, Tyler added quickly, loyally. She's trying really hard to find a new job. I'm sure she is, James said. He thought for a moment. What kind of work does your mom do? She used to be a nurse's aide, but now she's looking for anything. Tyler pushed the last bite of pie around his plate. She's really smart, and she works hard, James nodded. I believe you. The diner had grown quiet in the afternoon lull. Only a couple of tables were still occupied. Raymond called from the kitchen that he was starting prep for dinner service. Tyler finished his dessert and looked at the clock on the wall. I should go soon. Need to meet my mom. The library's quite a walk from here, James said. You got time. The boy wiped his mouth with his napkin and carefully arranged his silverware on the empty plate. How much do I owe you? He asked, the question heartbreaking in its adultness. Nothing, James said firmly. Like I told you, nobody goes hungry here. Tyler looked up at him with confusion in his eyes. But why? It was such a simple question, but it carried the weight of a child's experience in a world where kindness often came with strings attached. James thought about how to answer. Because it's the right thing to do, he said finally, and because someone helped me once when I needed it. Tyler seemed to consider this. I can't pay you back. You don't need to, James assured him. But someday when you see someone else who needs help, maybe you can do something kind for them. That's how it works. The boy nodded solemnly as if accepting an important mission. Now, James said, before you head out, let me pack something for your mom. She's probably hungry too. Tyler's face brightened. Really? Of course, James said, standing up. And maybe a little extra for both of you for later. As James went to the kitchen to prepare a care package, he didn't see the well-dressed man who had left earlier now standing across the street, watching the diner thoughtfully. The man had his phone out and appeared to be making notes, occasionally glancing up at the faded sign that read, Wilson's Diner, in chipped gold letters. James returned from the kitchen with a brown paper bag. The savory smell of fresh food wafted from it as he placed it on the table in front of Tyler. Here you go, he said. Meatloaf sandwich for your mom, some cookies, fruit, and a couple bottles of water. Tyler stared at the bag, his eyes wide with disbelief. All of that? All of that, James confirmed with a nod. Should keep you both going for a bit. The boy reached for the bag hesitantly as if afraid it might disappear. When his fingers closed around the paper, he pulled it close to his chest. Thank you, he said, the words small but heavy with genuine gratitude. You're welcome, James replied. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card for the diner. It was simple. Just the name, address, and phone number printed in black on a white card. If you and your mom need a meal, you come back here, okay? Doesn't matter if you have money or not. Tyler took the card carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Okay, James glanced at the clock. It's almost 4. You said you need to meet your mom at 5, right? Want me to give you directions to the library from here? Tyler nodded, standing up from the table. He was tall for 11, but so thin that his clothes hung from his frame. Despite his circumstances, there was something dignified about how he carried himself. James walked him to the door and pointed east. Go down this street for 6 blocks, then turn right. You'll see the library 2 blocks up on the left. Big stone building with columns out front. I know which one, Tyler said. We go there a lot. A heaviness settled in James's chest as he realized what that meant. The library was probably one of the few safe, warm places the boy and his mother had found in the city. Thank you again for the food, Tyler said, clutching the paper bag. It was really good. You come back any time, James told him, holding the door open. Tyler stepped outside, then paused and looked back. My mom's a really good worker. If you ever need help in your restaurant. The offer hung in the air. A child trying to find a way to repay kindness and help his mother at the same time. I'll keep that in mind, James said gently. What's your mom's name? Diane, Tyler replied. Diane Morris, James nodded. Tell Diane I said hello, and that I meant what I said about coming back if you need a meal. Tyler gave a small smile, the first real smile James had seen from him, and then turned and walked away, his two big shoes scuffing against the sidewalk. James watched until the boy turned the corner, then went back inside. The diner was quiet now, in the lull between lunch and dinner. Raymond was in the kitchen prepping for the evening rush, and the waitress, Loretta, was due to arrive for her shift in about an hour. As James wiped down the counter, his mind kept returning to Tyler and his mother. How many others were out there, he wondered. Just one stroke of bad luck away from losing everything. The boy's simple explanation, Mom got sick, and said it all. In this country, in this economy, that was sometimes all it took. The bell above the door jingled, pulling James from his thoughts. A woman in a business suit entered, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, I'll have those reports to you by end of day," she was saying as she approached the counter. She held up one finger to James, indicating she needed a moment. James nodded and waited patiently while she finished her call. "Sorry about that," she said when she hung up. "Could I get a coffee to go? Black, no sugar." "Coming right up," James replied, reaching for a paper cup. As he poured the coffee, the woman glanced around the diner. "How long has this place been here?" "I work just down the street, but I've never noticed it before." 20 years, James told her, securing the lid on her cup. "We're easy to miss with all the new places opening up." "Well, I'm glad I found it. The chain places charge $5 for a plain coffee these days." James rang up her order. "That'll be $2. The woman handed him a $5 bill. "Keep the change," she said with a smile. "I'll be back. Thank you. Have a good day," James replied, tucking the tip into the jar by the register. After she left, he went to the table where Tyler had sat and began to clean it. As he wiped down the surface, he noticed something on the floor under the chair, a small worn notebook. Tyler must have dropped it. James picked it up, hesitating before opening the cover. Inside, on the first page, was written in careful letters, "Property of Tyler Morris. If found, please return." There was no address or phone number. He flipped through a few pages, seeing drawings, some math problems, and what looked like a journal entry dated 3 weeks ago. "We have to leave our apartment tomorrow. Mom says we'll be okay. She doesn't cry in front of me, but I heard her last night after she thought I was asleep." James closed the notebook, feeling like he had intruded on something private. He needed to get this back to Tyler, but he had no way to contact him except to hope the boy would return to the diner. The front door opened again, and James looked up, half expecting to see Tyler. Instead, it was the well-dressed man from earlier. "Forget something?" James asked. The man approached the counter. "In a way. I wanted to speak with you if you have a moment." James set the notebook on the shelf behind the counter, making a mental note to keep it safe until Tyler returned. "What can I do for you?" "My name is Alexander Reed," the man said, extending his hand. "I noticed what you did for that boy earlier." James shook his hand, his expression guarded. "Tyler, his name is Tyler." Alexander nodded. "Tyler, what you did for him was kind." "It was just a meal," James said with a shrug. "Nothing special." "We both know it was more than that," Alexander replied. "You treated him with dignity. That matters." James wasn't sure what to make of this conversation. "Did you need something, Mr. Reed?" "Please call me Alex." He glanced around the diner. "Actually, I'd like to learn more about this place." "Been here long?" 20 years, James said, repeating what he'd told the woman earlier. "Started it when this neighborhood was very different." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "Family business?" "No, just me. Always wanted my own place. And the food? Those recipes from anywhere special?" James leaned against the counter, curious about the man's interest but not showing it. "Some were my grandmother's. She taught me to cook when I was a kid. Others I developed over the years." Alexander seemed genuinely interested, asking about the history of the diner, how James had gotten started, what challenges he faced in the business. James answered cautiously at first, then more openly as the conversation continued. There was something about Alexander that seemed trustworthy despite his obvious wealth. The truth is, James admitted after they'd been talking for a while, this place is struggling. Has been since the pandemic. Food costs are up, rent's increasing, and a lot of my regular customers have been priced out of the neighborhood. Yet you still feed people who can't pay, Alexander observed. James straightened his shoulders. "Some things matter more than money." Alexander smiled slightly. "I agree, more than you might think." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, setting it on the counter. I have a proposition for you, Mr. Wilson, but not one I can discuss right now. I have a meeting to get to, but I'd like to continue this conversation tomorrow if you're willing. James picked up the card. It was expensive cardstock with just a name and phone number printed in a simple font. No company name, no title. What kind of proposition? A business one, Alexander replied. But I need to do some research first. Can I come back tomorrow morning? James studied the man's face, looking for any sign of dishonesty. He found none. I open at 6. I'll be here at 7, Alexander said, heading toward the door. Thank you for your time, Mr. Wilson. After he left, James looked at the card again. The name matched, but it told him nothing about who Alexander Reed was or what he wanted. James tucked the card into his pocket alongside Tyler's notebook and went back to preparing for the dinner service. The evening passed in a blur of orders, conversations with regulars, and the constant movement of running a busy diner. James found himself watching the door each time it opened, hoping to see Tyler return for his notebook. But the boy didn't come back. Around 9, as they were preparing to close, Loretta approached James at the register. Who was that man in the fancy suit who came in twice today? She asked, counting her tips. Not our usual customer. Said his name was Alexander Reed, James replied. Coming back tomorrow morning to discuss some kind of business proposition. Loretta raised an eyebrow. Business proposition? What kind of business would a man like that have with our little diner? No idea, James admitted. Guess I'll find out tomorrow. As he locked up that night, James found himself thinking about both Tyler and Alexander, two very different people who had walked into his diner on the same day. One needed a meal he couldn't pay for, the other could probably buy the entire block without blinking. Yet there had been something in Alexander's eyes when he watched James interact with Tyler, something that looked almost like recognition. James shook his head, too tired to puzzle it out now. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For tonight he had a diner to close and books to balance before he could go home to his small apartment above the laundromat 2 streets over. As he turned off the lights, his hand brushed against Tyler's notebook in his pocket. He made a silent promise to himself to find a way to get it back to the boy, even if it meant going to the library tomorrow to look for him and his mother. The next morning arrived with a steady drizzle that turned the city streets slick and gray. James opened the diner at 6 as usual, turning on lights that glowed warmly against the dreary weather outside. Tyler's notebook sat on the shelf behind the counter, a constant reminder of the boy who had briefly entered his life and then disappeared again. The breakfast rush was slower than normal due to the rain, but by 7, several regulars had claimed their usual tables. The bell above the door jingled, and James looked up to see Alexander Reed shaking raindrops from his umbrella. Unlike yesterday when he had worn an expensive suit, today he was dressed more casually in dark jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than James's monthly rent. Right on time, James called from behind the counter. Coffee? Please, Alexander replied, setting his umbrella in the stand by the door. James poured a cup and gestured to a small table in the corner, away from the other customers. Let's sit there. Loretta can handle things for a few minutes. They settled at the table, James placing the coffee in front of Alexander, who wrapped his hands around the warm mug. For a moment, neither spoke. So, James finally said, what's this business proposition? Alexander took a sip of his coffee. First, I want to be honest about who I am. My name is Alexander Reed, and I'm the founder and CEO of Reed Technologies. James raised an eyebrow. The software company? Yes, we specialize in healthcare software systems. Now James understood the expensive clothes and watch. Reed Technologies was a billion-dollar company with offices around the world. What does a tech CEO want with my small diner? Alexander set his mug down. I grew up in this neighborhood, Mr. Wilson. Before the coffee shops and boutiques moved in, my mother worked 2 jobs, and there were times when we struggled to make ends meet. He paused. What I saw yesterday, how you treated that boy, it reminded me of something. James waited, watching Alexander's face carefully. When I was 10, Alexander continued, my mother and I were going through a rough patch. She'd lost one of her jobs and things were tight. There was a small restaurant near our apartment, not unlike this one. The owner noticed I was hungry one day and fed me. No questions asked, no payment expected, just kindness. That's just being decent, James said with a shrug. Perhaps, but it was also a turning point for me. That man treated me with dignity when I had none. It mattered. Alexander leaned forward slightly. Yesterday I saw history repeating itself in how you treated that boy, Tyler. James thought about the notebook in his pocket. He forgot something here. I need to get it back to him, but I don't know how to find him. The library, Alexander suggested. He said he meets his mother there, right? I was thinking of going there this afternoon, James admitted. Alexander nodded, then steered the conversation back. Mr. Wilson, I've spent the evening looking into your diner. You've been a fixture in this community for 2 decades. You've employed local people, fed those who couldn't pay, and created a space where everyone is treated with respect. I try, James said simply, but you're struggling financially. It wasn't a question, and James didn't treat it as one. The neighborhood's changing. Rent's going up. My old customers are being pushed out, and the new ones want fancy coffee places, not diners. Alexander nodded. That's why I'm here. I want to invest in Wilson's diner. James blinked in surprise. Invest? Why would you want to do that? This place isn't exactly a gold mine. Not every investment is about money, Alexander replied. Some are about preserving what matters. He pulled a folder from his bag and placed it on the table. I've had my team draft a proposal. I'd like to purchase the building your diner is in. I don't own the building, James pointed out. I just rent the space, I know. But if I buy it, you'll never have to worry about rent increases or being pushed out. You'd have a permanent home for the diner. James stared at him, trying to process what he was hearing. And what would you get out of this? A few things, Alexander said. First, a good investment in real estate. Property in this area is only going to increase in value. Second, the satisfaction of preserving a neighborhood institution that means something to the community. And third, James asked, sensing there was more. Alexander smiled slightly. Third, I'd like to fund an expansion of what you're already doing. Feeding people who need it regardless of their ability to pay. A formal program properly funded? James sat back in his chair, stunned. You want to turn my diner into a charity? No, Alexander shook his head firmly. I want it to remain exactly what it is. A good diner that serves good food to paying customers. But I also want to support and expand the work you're already doing on the side. James reached for the folder and opened it, scanning the documents inside. The proposal was detailed. Purchase of the building, a 20-year lease to James at a nominal rent, funding for kitchen upgrades, and a community meal program. It was generous beyond anything James could have imagined. Why? He asked, looking up from the papers. Why would you do this? Alexander was quiet for a moment. Because 30 years ago someone did something similar for me when I needed it most, and because places like this are disappearing. They matter. He gestured around the diner. This matters. Before James could respond, the bell above the door jingled again. Both men looked up to see Tyler standing in the doorway, soaking wet from the rain. Beside him stood a thin woman with the same dark eyes as her son, her hand protectively on his shoulder. James stood immediately. Tyler. The boy stepped forward, his mother following closely. I left my notebook, he said, his voice small but determined. It's important. It has all my schoolwork in it. I have it, James assured him, reaching under the counter for the notebook. I was going to try to find you at the library today. Relief washed over Tyler's face as James handed him the notebook. Thank you. James turned his attention to the woman beside Tyler. You must be Diane. I'm James Wilson. She nodded, her posture tense but her eyes kind. Tyler told me what you did for him yesterday. I wanted to thank you in person and she hesitated. Pride warring with necessity. And to ask about what he said. About you maybe needing help here. James glanced at Alexander, who was watching the interaction with interest. Then back to Diane. Actually, I might be expanding soon. Could use another set of hands. He gestured to a table. Why don't you two sit down? I'll get you some breakfast and we can talk. We can't pay, Diane said quietly, her voice firm but embarrassed. Today's on the house, James replied. Tomorrow we'll figure something out. He turned to Alexander. Give me a few minutes. Alexander nodded. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. James led Tyler and Diane to a table, signaling to Loretta to bring them coffee and juice. As he walked back to the counter to put in their breakfast order, he caught Alexander watching the scene with an expression that was hard to read, something between satisfaction and nostalgia. When James returned to Alexander's table, the businessman closed the folder of documents. Take some time to look these over. Have your lawyer review them. There's no rush. I will, James agreed. But I have a condition of my own. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Which is? James nodded toward Tyler and Diane. They need help. Not just a meal, but a fresh start. A place to live, a steady job for Diane, school for Tyler. And you think I should provide that? Alexander asked, his tone curious rather than dismissive. You said you wanted to invest in what matters, James replied simply. They matter. Alexander studied James's face for a long moment, then smiled. You know, the man who helped me when I was a child said something very similar to someone about my mother and me. He glanced at Tyler and Diane again. I'll see what I can do, James nodded, satisfied. Then we might have something to talk about. For the next hour, the diner continued its normal morning routine around them. Customers came and went. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the air, and the rain tapped steadily against the windows. James moved between tables, refilling cups and chatting with regulars. He stopped often at Tyler and Diane's table, making sure they had everything they needed. From his corner, Alexander watched it all. He made a few calls on his phone, speaking quietly, his eyes occasionally drifting to Tyler, who was showing his mother something in his recovered notebook. When Diane finished her breakfast, she approached James at the counter. Tyler said you might have work. I'm a hard worker, Mr. Wilson. I was a nurse's aide before things went sideways. I can wait tables, clean, whatever you need. James considered her. Despite her circumstances, she stood straight, her clothes worn but clean, her eyes direct and honest. When can you start? Hope flickered across her face. Right now? James nodded. Loretta can train you. It's not full-time yet, but it's something. It's more than something, Diane said, her voice catching slightly. It's a chance. As James showed Diane to the back to get an apron, he passed Alexander, who was now standing by the door, ready to leave. I have meetings all day, Alexander explained, but I'll be in touch tomorrow about those papers. And about the other matter we discussed. James extended his hand. Thank you. Alexander shook it firmly. No, Mr. Wilson, thank you for reminding me of something important. He glanced toward Tyler, who was drawing in his notebook at the table. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness have the biggest impact. As Alexander left, the bell above the door jingled once more. Outside, the rain had stopped, and a thin ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow through the diner's front windows. James looked around at his small kingdom, at Loretta showing Diane how to work the coffee machine, at Tyler contentedly drawing at his table, at the regulars reading newspapers and chatting over their meals. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of financial worry lifting from his shoulders. Whatever came next, he knew his diner would survive, and with it, the spirit of community he had built over 20 years. The future, which had seemed so uncertain just yesterday, now held promise not just for him, but for Tyler and Diane as well. 3 months passed. Winter softened into spring, bringing longer days and the occasional warm breeze through the diner's propped-open door. Inside Wilson's diner, more had changed than just the season. James stood at the counter, surveying his domain with quiet satisfaction. The worn linoleum floor had been replaced with new tile that looked vintage but didn't crack underfoot. The booths were reupholstered in deep red vinyl that matched the original color, but without the tears and patches. The kitchen gleamed with updated equipment that made Raymond, the cook, whistle while he worked. But the most important things remained the same. The photographs on the walls telling the story of the neighborhood, the familiar smell of coffee and bacon, and the steady stream of regulars who claimed their usual tables each morning. Order up, Raymond called through the service window, sliding 2 plates onto the counter. Diane, now in a crisp white apron with Wilson's Diner embroidered on the pocket, grabbed the plates with practiced ease. 3 months of waitressing had given her confidence and a healthy flush to her cheeks that had been missing when James first met her. Chicken fried steak for table 4, she said, moving smoothly between tables. Her smile came easier these days, natural and warm. James watched her work, remembering how nervous she'd been her first week. Now she knew most customers by name and remembered their usual orders without writing them down. The bell above the door jingled, and Tyler walked in, his backpack slung over one shoulder. At 12 years old, he had grown at least an inch in the past 3 months, and his clothes, new ones that actually fit, made him look like any other middle school kid rather than a boy on the edge of homelessness. Hey, Mr. Wilson, he called, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "How was school?" James asked, pouring a glass of chocolate milk without being asked. It had become their after-school ritual. "Good. Got an A on my science project." Tyler pulled a folder from his backpack and laid it on the counter, the one about sound waves. "That's great," James said, genuinely proud. "Your mom's going to be thrilled." Tyler took a long drink of his milk. "Is she still on shift?" "For another hour," James replied. "Then you two can head home." Home. Such a simple word, but one that had meant so much to Tyler and Diane when they'd finally gotten one again. Alexander Reed had been true to his word. Within 2 weeks of their meeting at the diner, he had found them a small but decent apartment in a building he owned just 6 blocks away. The rent was reasonable, not free because Diane had insisted on paying something, and close enough for her to walk to work and for Tyler to attend the local middle school. The back door opened, and Loretta bustled in from her smoke break. "Alexander just pulled up," she announced. "Driving that fancy electric car again?" James nodded. Alexander had become a regular visitor over the past 3 months, stopping by at least once a week to check on the renovations and have a meal. Despite his wealth and status, he always ordered the daily special and sat at the counter like any other customer. The bell jingled again, and Alexander walked in, nodding to several regulars who now recognized him. He made his way to the counter and took a seat 2 stools down from Tyler. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he said, setting his phone face down on the counter, a small gesture that James had come to appreciate. When Alexander was in the diner, he gave people his full attention. "Hey, Mr. Reed," Tyler said. "Want to see my science project?" "Got an A?" "Absolutely," Alexander replied, genuine interest in his voice. As Tyler proudly showed off his project, explaining the principles of sound waves with surprising clarity for a 12-year-old, James poured Alexander a cup of coffee. "How's the community meal program going?" Alexander asked when Tyler returned to his chocolate milk. 27 meals yesterday, James reported. Mostly seniors from the apartment building down the street, a few folks from the shelter, and some students from the community college. The community meal program had been Alexander's idea, but James had embraced it fully. 3 days a week, from 2 to 4 in the afternoon between lunch and dinner service, the diner offered free meals to anyone who needed them. No questions asked, no paperwork required, just food and respect. "And the cooking classes?" Alexander asked. James smiled. "Starting next week. Raymond's excited to teach people how to make simple, nutritious meals on a budget." This had been James's addition to the program, teaching people not just to eat, but to cook for themselves. The health department had approved the use of the kitchen during off hours, and they already had 12 people signed up for the first class. Alexander nodded, satisfied. "The foundation transferred the next quarter's funding yesterday. You should have everything you need." The Reed Foundation, Alexander's charitable organization, had provided the financial backing for both the diner's renovation and the community programs. But true to his word, Alexander had kept the diner itself as James's domain, never interfering with the menu or how he ran the business. "We're good," James confirmed. "Diane's been keeping the books. She's got a head for numbers." As if on cue, Diane appeared at the counter, coffee pot in hand, to refill Alexander's cup. "Mr. Reed," she greeted him with a smile. "Good to see you." "You too, Diane. James tells me you're handling the program's accounting now." She nodded, a hint of pride in her expression. "Just the basic bookkeeping. I'm taking an accounting class at the community college 2 nights a week. Thought it might be useful." "More than useful," Alexander said. "The foundation always needs people with financial skills." Diane's eyes widened slightly at the implication, but she just smiled and moved on to refill other customers' cups. "She's doing well," Alexander observed quietly. "They both are," James agreed, glancing at Tyler, who was now doing homework at the counter. "The apartment working out okay?" "Better than okay. Diane's actually helping some of the other tenants navigate the social services system. She's got a knack for cutting through red tape." James wasn't surprised. He'd seen how fiercely Diane fought for her son, how determined she was to get back on her feet. That kind of strength didn't just disappear when things got better. It found new ways to express itself. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting a warm glow over the diner. A young couple came in and took a booth in the corner. An elderly man at a window table folded his newspaper neatly and signaled for his check. The normal rhythms of the diner continued around them. I got the notice yesterday, James said after a moment. About the business association. Alexander nodded. What do you think? The notice had been about the formation of a new neighborhood business association, aimed at preserving locally owned shops and restaurants in the face of chain stores moving in. Alexander had purchased not just the Diners building but 3 others on the block, offering long-term, affordable leases to the small businesses that occupied them. I think it's good, James said. This neighborhood needs to remember its roots while it's busy growing new branches. Alexander smiled at the metaphor. That's exactly what I was thinking. He took a sip of his coffee. I have a proposal for you, James raised an eyebrow. Another one? The foundation is expanding its community food initiative citywide. We need someone to oversee the program, someone who understands food, community, and dignity. And you want me to find you this person? James asked, though he suspected where this was going. Alexander shook his head. I want you to be this person. 3 days a week. You'd still have the diner the other 4. Raymond and Diane can handle things while you're out. James was quiet for a moment, considering. A year ago, he could barely keep his diner afloat. Now he was being offered a position helping to create programs like his across the city. Why me? He finally asked. Because you already understood something that took me years to learn, Alexander replied. That food is more than nutrition. It's dignity, connection, community. He gestured around the diner. You built this place on those values. Now you can help build more. Before James could respond, the bell above the door jingled again. A thin teenager stepped inside, looking around uncertainly. His clothes were too large, his shoes worn thin, and his eyes held the same wariness that James had seen in Tyler's 3 months ago. Without hesitation, James walked out from behind the counter. Welcome to Wilson's Diner, he said warmly. Are you hungry? The boy nodded, his eyes darting toward the exit as if calculating whether this was a trick. Then you've come to the right place, James told him, guiding him to a table. Today's special is meatloaf, but we can make you whatever you like. As James settled the boy at a table, he caught Alexander watching with an approving smile. Across the diner, Tyler looked up from his homework, recognition in his eyes as he observed the scene playing out, the same scene he had been part of 3 months ago. After taking the boy's order, James returned to the counter where Alexander waited patiently. So, Alexander said, about that position. James glanced around his diner, at Diane confidently serving customers, at Tyler doing homework at the counter, at Raymond cooking up a special meal for a hungry stranger, at the photographs on the walls that told the story of a neighborhood that was changing but not forgotten. I'll do it, he said, but the diner stays exactly as it is. I wouldn't have it any other way, Alexander assured him. After all, this is where it all started. As James moved back behind the counter, he felt a sense of completion. The diner that had been his life's work for 20 years would now become something more. A model for others. A seed that would grow in different soil across the city. And it had all begun with a simple act. A meal given freely to a hungry child. Witnessed by someone who understood its value. Tyler closed his homework book and slid off his stool. James watched as the boy walked over to the new teenager and sat down across from him. He couldn't hear what Tyler said, but he saw the wariness in the stranger's eyes soften slightly as Tyler talked. One meal, one moment of kindness. The ripples moved outward, touching life after life, building connections that would continue long after the day's last customer had gone home. James picked up the coffee pot and moved to refill Alexander's cup. So, he said with a smile, tell me more about this foundation of yours. Outside, the spring sun warmed the diner's faded sign, the gold letters still spelling out Wilson's Diner, a small place where big things happened, one meal at a time.